Welcome, 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 my forest explorers, those of you who are still with me, because I know a few of you have dropped out. The viewership seems to be dwindling, but I am here to see it out until the end. I know I've quit one other book before, but I don't intend to quit this one. It is keeping my attention enough to where I want to find out how this thing ends, although somebody out there in the comments alerted me to the fact that, no, it doesn't seem to really come together. It doesn't seem to really push forward. And unfortunately, after two parts of this novel, I feel like the story is just kind of, I'd like to call it a slow burn. I really would love to I would really love to call it a slow burn, but it seems like the characters are just kind of running in place, if that makes sense. They're moving inch by inch by inch. It seems as if Brian Catling is far more interested in creating a quirky, strange world filled with these characters than he is telling his stories. But like I said, fear not, I'm going to see this until the end. Which brings us to chapter 22. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're covering chapters 22 to 25. This is episode 6, I believe. I think this series is going to probably top out at about 9 episodes, but we'll see when we get to the end. But Gertrude and Serena had heard rumors about the workforce of the Vorrh, the Lamboya. They knew that the Lamboya were said to be becoming less than human, a condition brought about by the prolonged contact with the Vorrh. That is something we have been alerted to. They're kind of like this strange hive mind, and we've actually seen that firsthand, which has been kind of cool. But McGlish, a talented Lamboya keeper, he is joining forces, not joining forces, but his path is crossing with these two young ladies. But so they journey to the doctor's house with a great hope of finding Ishmael before all chance had passed. The thing that they bring back is, I was kind of confused at first. I wasn't sure if it was Ishmael, and Serena was just absolutely shocked at what she saw, or if it was in fact these. Let me try to remember how it's spelled. Anthropomorphy. Anthropomorphagy, I don't know, something like that. We'll get there. It's highlighted, but it's a strange word, and these are very strange creatures. But four young people tussled together in a noisy sport, and so what this is, it's that that curse. What do they call it? The touch, I believe it's referred to here. At least Dr. Hoffman refers to it as that, where the game of tag that Ishmael created, where one healing of an affliction pass on to another, but then you lose your healing. Serena asked the driver, though, as they're going on their way, "Rupert, go and see what has happened and if we can be of any help." The girl is sobbing, I can't see. Well, we already know what this is about, so I'm not quite sure what the whole point of this was. Maybe because we already know that Serena knew about this stuff. Maybe it's to bring Gertrude into it. Maybe it's to show how this touch, this affliction is spreading like wildfire throughout the city. But 10 minutes later, they arrived at the doctor's house. "Dr. Hoffman, one hears that you are a good friend of the keeper of the Lamboya." "Yes, Mistress Law, that is true." And then Serena is asking about McGlish, and of course the doctor says, "Why do you ask about McGlish?" "A dear friend of ours has gone into the Vorrh, and we fear for his safety and well-being." That is the man named Ishmael, well, the Cyclops, and she wants to go in and fetch him out, but he says, "My dear, I'm afraid that would be quite impossible. You may know that I am a woman of some wealth, and that Mistress Toop's family have great influence among the various guilds." "I was only anxious for your safety, Mistress Law." "Dr. Hoffman, we do appreciate your concern, but you must understand that your descriptions only make me more determined." Of course. Very determined ladies. "If we can't go, maybe we can pay for someone else to search for him in our place. The Lamboya, perhaps." "My dear, the Lamboya cannot find themselves, let alone anybody else." "Then what about the Orm?" Which is strange. Like, why does Gertrude know about the Orm? And in fact, that's exactly what Hoffman says. "The what?" I don't know what you mean." "The thing that lives within the Lamboya, that you have use of." "I will pay dearly for this to happen. And if you and your Orm are part of it, then we shall all profit from finding him." "I will have to talk to McGlish." "However, there is one other detail of great importance. Our friend is severely deformed. The whole thing must remain entirely private, you understand." The agreement was made that he would talk to McGlish about setting the Orm loose in the forest. And Hoffman looked down at Gertrude's waist and quietly said, "I am here to help you with the other problem, if you so want." So, yeah, we know we got little baby Cyclops growing in Gertrude's belly. And Gertrude had been spending less and less time at Vorrh Brunnen. And the message had come through that the Cyclops had been found and taken to the old slave house. And she says, "We are bringing Ishmael home today." And they drove the last few miles to the slave house in silence. "He was bloody difficult to bring in. Are you sure you know this thing? You did not hurt him. Ishmael, we have come to take you home. Gertrude is here with me. Do you recognize me? I am the owl. I am the one you spent the night with during the carnival." But when he looked up at them, both women started to scream, and that took me aback until this next section right here, which explains. Gertrude is holding Serena, one arm around her sobbing shoulder. "We got our Cyclops, and now ye scream at it. That thing is not Ishmael. But ye said ye slept with it." "Slept with that?" Her eyes had become terrible. Every part of her previous pain and immediate disappointment was hurtling in a tornado of fury. And McGlish recognized a sudden animal. He had seen this in the war. It had been rare and lethal, and he held it in respect. "What are we going to do with that thing?" Hoffman says. "Take it back or kill it. Nobody wants Loverboy here." And Loverboy, the creature they named Loverboy, stood naked, 4 feet high, in the straw at the back of the cell. His skin was deathly pale with yellowish tinge. He had long, thin limbs, and his torso was squat and square. His head grew out from his chest, so that his forehead sloped into his shoulders, putting his tiny mouth level to where human nipples should be. He was the first of his kind to be taken bodily out of the forest. We meet a lot of his kind later on in this, and we find out that they're extremely brutal. Something about the description here. He has a single eye, was leveled his armpits, and it blinks sphincter-like. Man, Catlin, he's obsessed with penises and butts and sex in general. But in the gloom, he did not think much of humans, though. Their only value was in terms of food. So, yeah, he's got a one-track mind. But I think there's mention in here of him getting a little horny, too, which, big surprise, right, knowing Catlin. But the two women traveled home together in silence. Serena dropped Gertrude off at Vorrh Brunnen, and the pair quietly said goodbye. What if that disgusting creature actually was the person she had slept with in the carnival night? So Serena is quite disturbed. She is not sure if this, in fact, is Ishmael, if she did have sex with this crazy creature that, to me, sounds like an 80s action figure toy that I might have played with. It just seems really odd with the head sort of in the middle of the body. But her annoyance quickly turned to indifference as she felt tickling movement in her abdomen, this being Gertrude, of course. Something tiny, not a kick. It was far too early for that, but something uncurling, becoming awake after a long period of hibernation. She's got aliens in her belly. She's got Cyclops aliens, Cyclopean aliens. I wonder if she's going to have this strange child, or if it's going to burst out of her belly by the end of this book. I don't know. But that brings me to chapter 23. Dr. Hoffman. He had been called to the house of August Darren, one of Essenwald's richest businessmen, who had demanded his presence immediately. Darren's wife had been attacked in the street by a mob of delinquents who had pulled her from her carriage. The touch, or the Fang Dick Crank. Fang Dick Crank. Really? Catling? Another dick reference? As it had become known, was sweeping the city, the laying on hands, the putrefaction of the unclean and the malformed. But then it turned malevolent, eccentric, and dangerous. We know all about this. The touch had become so random that it reached fanatic proportions, causing a plague of the injured, and the healed to spread chaotically throughout all of Essenwald. So I imagine this is going to be probably a big part of Book 2. But the shaking of hands was no longer reasonable. Bowing and heel clicking had returned, as the arm crossing a chest with a clenched fist. So this is just kind of expository stuff about the effects of the touch. But Hoffman had become quite the authority on the touch. He was making steady progress towards the cure of the dreadful blight. In truth, he had carried out a few botched autopsies, treated some of the afflicted with prodigious doses of barbiturates. But his major discovery was that the phenomenon was in decline, in fact. So who knows? Maybe it won't be a big deal. I think it's going to be a big deal because Hoffman. Well, we'll find out what happens to Hoffman. His status in the community was growing steadily. The lower woman is very well connected, though. A word in the right place could dislodge his achievements. His knowledge of the Cyclops' existence protected him, though, right? He has a little bit of leverage there. They had now used the Orm 9 times, and 2 of those had gone seriously awry. So really this section is just about the state of the touch, also these, political machinations that Hoffman has. But that brings us to McClish. He was going to be honored. The guild had invited him and his wife to a special dinner to mark the company's increase in productivity. They were dressing in the bedroom, so there's just like a, I don't know, kind of a weird discussion, standard discussion that seemed to honestly really go nowhere in this next part, so I will skip it. But the doctor waited for 10 long minutes after the headlights of the car had vanished from the road. He was just about to strike the gong when he heard the footfall on the metal stair. The Lamboya were descending slowly. Vorrh, said the herald in a flat, dead tones. The doctor explained the specific requirements of the task and how it must be done. He had mentioned the Tulps and indeed the Lore family while treating August Darren's wife, who, if transpired, was a victim of the touch. The Tulps are new blood, second-generation merchants made good, Darren had told them. Did you know that she was born blind? Speaking of Serena, of course. I have some knowledge of her case, but I am unable to speak of it. You understand. McClish had realized the strict social rules and accepted some wine in the name of self-congratulation. Maria had been escorted to a seat 4 rooms away and sat in the middle of her worst nightmare. All these crazy ladies. And she tries to get out of it, right? She needs to give her husband his medicine, allegedly. And Hoffman walked himself to the front steps of the house and rang the bell. Gertrude was there. Is this your house, Mistress Tulp? He asked. No, doctor, it belongs to a friend, she answered with a modest smile. May I offer you a sherry? That would be delightful. It must be one of the oldest houses in the city. Yes, it is one of the older properties. The basement is even older. It still has an old well, hence the name. Which I looked up. So Kulu Brunnen, for those of you out here who didn't know, it is German for the Great Well. What may I do for you, Dr. Hoffman? Firstly, my dear, I wanted to apologize for that distasteful business in the slave house. Anyway, it's all taken care of now, and we can begin again to look for Ishmael, was it? Mistress Lore and I no longer wish to engage in your services. We no longer feel it necessary to go searching for him. He will surely make his way out of the Vorrh in his own time. How did you manage to get such a monster out in the first place? Using the Orm, Dr. Hoffman. Well, Mistress Tulp, why don't you tell me? You seem to know all about it. How is Serena? Mistress Lore is still recovering from the humiliation that you and that brute put her through. Why did you come here? I came here to encourage your silence about our business together. I think our families would be very interested to know about your favors, don't you, Doctor? You dare threaten me? I will not hesitate to spread the truth about your secret friend, about him fucking you and that law slut, about everything else, the house, everything. Good, do it. I warn you. With what? With your life. You open your mouth and I will shut it permanently. I will have the Orm hollow out your soul and deposit it on my dissecting table, and I will cut that bastard out of your cunt. I will. His ring caught on her necklace, breaking it. It flew away from her, and the pearls shot out, gunning in all directions. But he looked up to see Mutter standing over him. Your point is made. I have calmed down now. I won't hurt her. But the next blow totally confused him, and he did not see it coming. Hoffman squinted and saw Mutter had a manuscript in his hand, a tight scroll of paper, some kind of accusation. But in fact, the scroll was not paper, but a 2-foot length of lead pipe. No, no, he cried. The third blow cracked his skull. The next blow fell across his ear, sending him rolling across the yard. He was on his hands and knees, whining like a lost dog as he vomited part of his tongue. The next blow crunched down into his head and removed the top of his fractured skull. His bright laboratory with all its new electrical equipment splashed out, his triumph and genius trickling onto the night-black cobbles where vivid sparks bounced like white pearls. I love that tie back. It's a beautiful visual sentence right there that is tying it back to the pearls that he ripped off Gertrude's neck. But Mutter dragged the body to the stables and loaded it into the smaller cart. The iron hooves of the tin clock stampeded into his dense and sweated dream. He was drunk, being McClish. He glanced at his wife, who seemed to have avoided the screeching siren of the alarm clock. The ripeness of her belly, so this is when we again are reminded of the fact that poor McClish, his wife has had miscarriages, numerous miscarriages, I believe, and he dearly wanted this child, and he hoped for a son. It was then that he saw the bruises on her arm and tasted the bile in his mouth. What had he done and said last night? How could he have let this happen? Today he would oversee the exchange of the Lamboya, the exhausted ones for the eager, the train loaded with their stupid bodies. They had moved Loverboy into the basement of the building, and his thoughts turned again to Loverboy. His captive was definitely getting thinner. His color had changed. He was given a nutritional mix of dried beans, cornstarch, and ground meat the same way. I don't know if they're cooking that, but dried beans, I don't know if you guys know out there, but if you have raw beans, you will get very, very sick. So maybe that's why. But Loverboy, who repeatedly threw the bowls of steaming gruel back to his captors. "Let the fucker starve," McGlish had said to his men after the third abortive attempt at the monster. But it was just before 7 o'clock, and his wife listened to the kitchen door being closed and the sound of his steps on the gravel outside. She opened her eyes and allowed a small sigh to escape from her lips, relieved to finally be released from her feigned sleep and the suffocation of his presence. Well, she won't have to deal with his presence much longer because McGlish, he doesn't end up so hot. But they got the crate and the Lamboya to the station without much incident. The keeper gave the signal and they steamed off and to be absorbed into the Vorrh. He walked along the Lamboya slave carriage, and it was empty, though. "Engineer!" he bellowed toward the back of the train. There was a small clearing at the edge of the forest, though, as if a straight line had been shaved out, and the Lamboya were all there, like ragged regimental parade, waiting to be inspected. "What the fuck are you doing out of this train? Get back in!" he bellowed. The tittering stopped, and they closed their eyes, though, in a slow, simultaneous movement. Then the breathing started. The breathing doubled in volume, but then he saw what the herald had in his hands, the loose strips of cloth that had been peeled away, and the near-naked thing rolled up in the manipulating hands, its lifeless limbs flopping back and forth with the movements. The eyes of the dead, aborted child, opened and stared into his. And then he passed out, and in a second every organ in his body had halted, as if they had never moved at all. Every cell gave up in the presence of the Orm. Only his mad eyes flashed in the dead head as his body slid to the ground. The Lamboya pointed at their hearts and dispersed into the depth of the forest with their prize. The frantic moving eyes in what had become a McGlish stared at Loverboy, who had been standing behind the Lamboya all along, patiently waiting. But even in his weakened condition, he had retained enough purpose, energy, and skill to gather some small branches and vines and construct a basic sledge. He dragged his creation toward the corpse. He was taking Red Fur, who is what McGlish is known as now, home to meet his people, and one of the stomachs was already rumbling. So Loverboy is a hungry boy, which brings us to chapter 24. It would have been foolish to think that the life of the arrows was inert or incidental. When Peter Williams lifted the gleaming bow into the sun of the early morning, he had cleaned and polished it in the dawn, but the bow felt like Este in his hand, eager, lithe, and determined. He knocked one of the whistling arrows and pulled back the bowstring, and then he loosened the arrow, picked up his pack, and climbed down toward the place where the arrow would wait for him. So Williams just keeps shooting arrows and following those arrows. However, though, Sungali is after him. But 2 hours later, he had reached the forest floor. It was a journey that would take him directly through the center of the forbidden territory. And here we are, speaking of the man himself. Sungali tripped over the pot. He had not seen it sitting clearly in the path, which I'm assuming is the pot that they used to, these anthropomorphagy, something like that, used to lure Ishmael, right? Because they are trapping him to eat. But something here was with him, but he was no ordinary white man. Sungali thought he might even be a ghost, again referring to Peter Williams. But even if he had escaped, he should be older than this. And I know I mentioned that some time ago. It's been many years since Sungali has been in contact with him, but he hasn't aged a bit. But there are worse things than the Englishman, even if he was a ghost. But then he hears the faint whistling in the sky. So we're getting a lot of back and forth scenes right here where we'll have, Peter Williams and Ishmael talking and dealing together, and then we'll cut to Sungali. So that starts to move more rapid fire, very reminiscent of Gardens of the Moon in its structure. And that, of course, all comes to a head. Ishmael had come to a place where a mighty oak had fallen, its prone bulk drawing a horizon in the world of verticals. He was beginning to enjoy the depth of this place, to feel a sense of belonging in its mysterious interior. The kin had shown him pictures and models of such places, and he remembered the stories of them. So he's recounting his lost days with his kin, his lovely kin. But somebody was walking on the side of him, just out of the periphery of his view. He called out to where the figure had disappeared, and the creature stood up, and he turned in horror to look at them all, their faces growing out of their chests. So here are more of the anthropomorphagy. Oh, here it is right here. Anthropophagy, something like that. But their mouth, jaw, nose, and ears grew out of their sternum, and a single eye stared out from their flat chests. And he's like, was this me? Is this what I am? But this was a subspecies, not a kindred race. Ishmael, whose interest in genitalia had always been intense, along with Mr. Brian Catling, gazed in amazement at their diversity and their proportions. So he was reminded of Lesson 93, Invertebrates of the Oceans, certain soft-bodied sea creatures. So he's wondering if their sex organs might indeed be separate species that shared a symbiotic relationship. Brian Catling, what is your absolute obsession with peni? I like that word better than penises. Even though it's not a word. But they moved closer and he froze. They touched him, held his legs, and looked up into his eye. The searing pain made Ishmael scream out in the trees. A thin hardwood blade had been pushed into his Achilles tendon. Oh my God, in his right leg. But suddenly there was an almighty explosion. The creature holding his leg split apart, the two halves of his upper body flying in opposite directions. So this is Peter Williams with his boomstick, essentially, which we get to see more of that a little bit later. But the creatures fled in ambush, vanishing into the undergrowth. What kind of thing are you? Don't look around. Lie still or you will bleed to death. Now answer my question, or I will destroy you like I destroyed your little brothers. They are no brothers of mine. Then what are you? I am a man with one eye. I can help you, if I trust you. What are you? I am Williams, and I am a man with 4 eyes. He's not wearing glasses, is he? I know, terrible joke, right? Sungali was drinking from the earthen bowl when he heard the shots. So again, linking these two storylines together. The stinking brown blood was still drying on his arm when the thing had bled to death, so he is checking out the aftermath of this business. It had been tracking him for days. It was one that his grandfather had told him of, the demons that hunted human flesh. But a makeshift bowl, which on closer examination proved to be the skull cap of a man, the skin a bright red hair still attached. So the third storyline linked, that is Mr. McClish's, what's left of him. But Sungali gathered some vines and tied them around the large, pointed feet of his fallen hunter. Under each armpit was hidden a small, delicate woven sphere of grass. It was attached to the skin by curved thorns that hooked in place. Each sphere contained a human eye. It's getting weirder and weirder, but the irises were moving, dilating back and forth, adjusting their sights. The eyes were still alive because of this orm business, apparently. But one of the eyes was linking, and I believe this is when he kind of, he cuts it open, and then he puts it down on the ground, and all these ants kind of start taking it away bit by bit. Not sure what the significance is there. Maybe it's part of the orm business. I was born this way, Ishmael answered with a wince. They were on a high rock in the sun. Williams had carried him there, away from the killing fields of the anthropophagy. I wanted to escape from the people and see if my origins were here. How long have you been here? I don't know, 6 days, maybe more. I have lost count. How long have you been here? Maybe a week, maybe a year, maybe much longer. I have little memory of the life I led before I entered this fearsome place. But I have been here before, of that I am certain. What lies ahead is only destiny, which you're quite familiar with. He's mentioned that before in previous chapters. They say that the forest lives on memory, that it devours the memory of men. She's getting restless. She wants to move on. She? It's a long story. Does it have a name? Ishmael says, regarding his, or referring to his bow. She did once. I think it was Este. But his eyes closed. Somewhere in its narrow slit rested the dark bow, whose name he had already forgotten. And Sungali found the remains of the slaughtered demons. He longed to be the owner of a weapon that could cause such utter devastation. He had tracked these two men from the place with the fallen tree, and he dreamt of his grandfather and his carved house. But at dawn he broke through the foliage. He found their tracks under the dew and followed up behind them. So he's reminded of his grandfather, and in fact, his grandfather seems to speak with him in a way, right? I don't know. Like, I feel like once we're in the Vorrh, everything kind of goes out the window, right? Any kind of real world physics and things that need to adhere to the laws of such things. But they exchanged names the next morning and set out about traveling together. Why are you not repelled by me? Do you not find my face offensive? I've seen worse. And you still help me now. Why is that? I suppose I could have easily left you, but everything here has meaning. All my purpose seems to be locked in the secrets of the Vorrh. Indeed, indeed. But they walked for 3 hours on a high ridge that peered out in a solid plain of trees. There is the center, said Williams, the core. Stay here. I shall return in a short while. And Sungali always completed a task once he undertaken it. He stopped suddenly and looked at his hands, holding Euclipsa, his fancy little rifle. Why was he doing this, though? For whom? He sat down and forgot his function. So he's been tracking Williams for some time, and He's second guessing this entire thing, which, after his face was completely destroyed, I can understand why. But a soft footfall was approaching behind him. "Little one, why are you lost here?" But behind him his grandfather said, "Come home, this place is full of demons and forsaken ones. There is nothing for you here." But Ishmael glanced at his sullen friend apprehensively. "Is something wrong?" "The shot was flawed. The arrow curved and fell short." "Are we walking into the core?" "In that direction. The arrow leads in that direction." "But she is struggling. This has never happened before. I think the bow wants you," which is an interesting turn of events. "She bleeds and strains towards your hand." Ishmael blinked at the now terrifying object held toward him. "I don't want this. It's your bow. I don't want it." "It's not about what you want," said Williams. "Come, take her from my hands." And Sugali knew that the voices of men, like their breath, did not always live in this world alone. That was what the child Iripineste was also wondrous at doing. Her voice had passed into the many worlds and brought great wisdom back. So it could be the voice of his grandfather behind him, but it could also be the voice of a ghost or demon that had stolen it. "Come, take my hand." He crept with his speed to the edge of the track and saw them in the path, unprepared and engaged in a type of bizarre white man's game. So intent was Williams in his self-imposed blindness that he did not hear the fast rustle of leaves or the velocity of the twigs breaking behind the Cyclops. Ishmael did the only thing that he knew would awaken Williams into that lethal moment. He snatched the bow from his hands. But Williams saw the charging man being Sugali, and as he ran, Sugali saw the creature raise the bow over his head, and Williams cocked and aimed the pistol as he saw the black man's eyes. The point of the bayonet was within 2 meters of Ishmael's chest when the great roar put a stop to all motion. Ishmael had dropped the bow, letting it spring away from his fast hands as he grabbed his ears, and Williams stepped past him, the pistol never wavering from his attention. He writhed in excruciating tangle while Williams slowly walked the narrow distance to stand over him, the smoking barrel at his side. That's a really cool image. That's a very Western-style image, right? I just picture Sungali barreling up this hill with his bayonet ready to kill Ishmael, and then boom, this roar, this crazy gun that that decimates everything, takes him out, and then cool and smooth, Mr. Marlboro Peter Williams is walking slowly up with the smoking gun. Which brings us to chapter 25, the very end of this section. But Charlotte watched him as he stared out to sea from the quarterdeck of the great white and silver ship. We are back with our dear Frenchman, who seems to have a problem after Salcor has died, and he seems to be infected, right? He's definitely not himself. But at night, under fierce stars, they in silence, with all her attempts at gentle conversation ignored or rebuffed. He no longer shared his hurt with her. Instead, she became the recipient of the brunt of his disappointment and his growing aimless anger. But she remembered a conversation she had once heard in her childhood. She was nestled under the thick legs of dark furniture while a Jewish relation explained stories of his faith. He talked about many peculiar and difficult things, but one stuck in her young mind: the division of day and night, and how dusk and dawn had 2 characteristics, the twilight of the dove and the twilight of the raven. She now understood that the rest of their time together would be like this, a constant dusk. She would maintain it and work on its luminance. It would be the twilight of the dove, and the raven would never be allowed in. So we have reached the end of chapter 25. We have reached the end of part 2. Let me know what you're thinking right now. It seems like Sungali just won't give up no matter what, but I'm really curious to see how he took that bullet, right? Supposedly he took the bullet because he's on the ground and we have a smoking gun. I think that was probably my favorite part of this, right? Seeing Peter Williams and Ishmael come together. And Ishmael doesn't seem so annoying to me right now. I feel like he is sort of getting what he deserved. He was kind of a dick with Gertrude and with Serena, and just kind of being careless and violent. And now he's kind of getting what he deserves. So happy to see that. I'm happy to see that Ishmael seems to be understanding, right, that he is out of his league, out of his depth in this forest, even though he came here to perhaps find where he came from. And McGlish, he didn't end up so hot. He's like a skull cap on one of these creatures' belts, and his eyeballs were in the armpits, I guess. And the Orm seems to be really taking root. I feel like that must be the core of where the story is going to end, which is kind of strange. Not, I shouldn't say really strange, but normally when you're reading a novel, generally the problem of the story kind of reveals itself earlier on, right? Whereas I feel like the Orm, what was it, maybe the 50% mark? Remind me in the comments, but it hasn't been that long since we've learned of the Orm. But Hoffman is dead. McGlish is dead. So that's one thing I do enjoy. I do enjoy that Catling doesn't seem to mind killing characters, very similar to George R.R. Martin. Not that these characters were insanely, pivotal to the overall story. Yes, they played their part. The one thing that still irks me, though, is when we were initially introduced to McGlish, is it was explained that he was more or less a nice guy. He didn't sort of treat the Lamboya as like slaves, but I've got nothing from this guy but asshole vibes, honestly. Like he's yelled at them, he's done terrible things, he's concocted these machinations, to try to make money. The only redeeming quality I think we've had of him is that he really wants a child, but unfortunately he'll never get it because, well, maybe his wife will have a kid. I don't quite know yet. But he will never see that day unless he is one with the Orm now. I have no idea. But anyway, let me know your thoughts. What are you thinking of the book? We are really coming to the end of it. And let's see, what should we read next? How about chapters 26 through 29? That's a good 40-ish pages, which will almost get us through halfway to part 3. So the next videos after that might be shorter because I don't know if I want to do a really long one or not. Anyway, I don't know. Let me know what you think. If you guys want me to do an extremely long one so there's not an extra part in the video, happy to do it if that is what you guys would like to see. But anyway, thank you for reading along with me. Thanks for hanging out with me. And I will see you next week with chapters 26 through 29.